Hello and thanks for joining us for our mid-morning edition of Arirang News. On this Friday, I'm Mark Broom. Let's kick things off by taking a look at the day's headlines. Checking out, South Korea pulls the plug on a military intelligence sharing agreement with Japan. The move sharply raises the stakes in the neighbors' dispute over trade and historical issues. The U.S. also expresses its dismay at the termination. So, what do the professionals think of Seoul's withdrawal? We're going to get some in-depth analysis of the situation from some experts. Plus, hope on the horizon for dialogue. A senior South Korean official says he sensed from Washington's point man on North Korea during a meeting in Seoul that talks between the North and the U.S. will resume soon. Only one place to start this morning, and that is with Thursday's bombshell announcement from South Korea's top office. Seoul will leave its military intelligence sharing pact with Japan, saying it's not in the national interest to maintain it. Now, this move is almost certain to have a crushing impact on already badly strained relations between South Korea and Japan over what started out initially as a row over trade and history. Our presidential office correspondent Shin Se-min starts us off.
South Korea said it is not extending the real-time classified military information sharing pact with Japan, the General Security of Military Information Agreement, otherwise known as GSOMIA.
The South Korean government has decided to end the General Security of Military Information Agreement and will inform Japan of the decision via diplomatic channel before the notification deadline.
South Korea's presidential office cited a grave change in security cooperation conditions, in addition to Japan's continued refusal to accept Seoul's dialogue proposals. The South Korean government said that Japan has violated bilateral trust by accusing Seoul of illegally transferring chemical materials to North Korea and used this ungrounded accusation as the reason for dropping South Korea from its whitelist of trusted trade partners. Furthermore, South Korea concluded that continuing GSOMIA with Japan no longer meets the national interest. This is one of the strongest measures against Japan by South Korea, a move that is seen to have raised the stakes in their deteriorating bilateral relations. Seoul's decision is likely to have implications to the three-way security cooperation among South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. The presidential office, however, said the decision to conclude GSOMIA does not mean the trilateral security partnership will weaken. An official at the top office explained that South Korea has already conveyed its inevitable decision to the U.S., to which Washington reportedly understood. South Korea's presidential office reiterated that the joint Seoul and Washington alliance will not be affected at any degree by the termination of the intel sharing pact with Japan. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, continuing our coverage of this story, Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono says South Korea's decision to walk away from the intelligence sharing pact with Tokyo is, quote, extremely regrettable. According to Kyodo News, Kono told reporters that Seoul is completely misreading the security situation in Northeast Asia by pulling out. He also summoned South Korea's ambassador to Japan late Thursday to lodge an official complaint. Seoul had said Tokyo's removal of South Korea from its list of preferred trading partners created a, quote, grave change to their cooperation on security. But Kono said the two matters are completely different and Seoul's claims are unacceptable. South Korea's top diplomat says the withdrawal decision was made separately to considerations over Seoul's alliance with Washington. Kang Kyung-hwa made the remarks late Thursday upon her arrival from Beijing, where she held talks with her Japanese counterpart. Neither side there budging on their trade spat.
The decision came amid a situation triggered by trust issues between Seoul and Tokyo, and so it's an issue separate from the South Korea-U.S. alliance. This also means there were discussions today on ways to continue boosting and developing the South Korea-U.S. alliance.
Kang also said South Korea will relay that same message when it officially notifies Japan and the US about the termination of the pact. Now, perhaps choosing its words carefully as all the related players continue to digest the news, the United States has expressed its disappointment and concern over South Korea's decision to withdraw from its military intelligence sharing pact with Japan. Kim Hyunwook with the details.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he's disappointed with Seoul's decision after South Korea announced it was withdrawing from its military intelligence sharing pact with Japan, known as the General Security of Military Information Agreement, or GSOMIA.
We're disappointed to see the decision that the South Koreans made about that information sharing agreement. We were urging each of the two countries to continue to engage, to continue to have dialogue.
At a joint press conference with his Canadian counterpart in Ottawa on Thursday, Pompeo said there's no doubt the shared interests of South Korea and Japan are important to the U.S. Pompeo said he hopes the two countries can begin to put their relationship back in exactly the right place. The Pentagon also voiced its worries. Spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Dave Eastburn said the Pentagon expresses strong concern and disappointment that the Moon administration has withheld its renewal of the military intelligence sharing agreement with Tokyo. Eastburn also said the U.S. believes the integrity of the three countries' mutual defense and security ties must persist despite frictions in other areas of the South Korea-Japan relationship. He added the U.S. will continue to pursue bilateral and trilateral defense and security cooperation with the two nations. On Thursday, South Korea's top office announced its decision to withdraw from the intel sharing pact with Japan. Seoul's decision means the agreement will end in November. Hyun-wook, Arirang News.
Now we're going to get some expert analysis on Seoul's decision to withdraw from that intelligence sharing pact with Tokyo. As a result of the decision, the pact will now officially come to an end in November. I'm glad to say we have Professor Kim Hyunwook from the Seoul-based Korea National Diplomatic Academy on the line for his thoughts. Now, Professor Kim, we've had slightly over 12 hours to digest this announcement. Do you think it was a reasonable response to Japan's trade pressure on Seoul or an ill-advised mistake by the Moon Jae-in government?
Well, from the President Moon Jae-in's perspective, it was due to Japan's that this kind of conflict between Japan and Korea has escalated so far. It was the historical issue first, and then Japanese response was, economic and trade issues, and now it's time for Korea to, retort it back in security issues. So this is his logic, but I would say that this is no good. I mean, now what is more important is security relationship and security of South Korea and economic relationship between Japan and Korea and U.S. and Japan and Korea, not domestic politics. But what is important thing now is that, Prime Minister Abe and President Moon Jae-in, their driving force for the conflict of Japan and Korea is domestic politics, not foreign policies. I think that's the problem.
Right, and Professor, there's no doubt really that this decision is going to severely affect South Korea's national security. Some analysts are calling it highly irresponsible, even malpractice. What does Seoul forfeit by leaving GSOMIA, and which country loses out most, or is it just a lose-lose situation for both South Korea and Japan?
I think this is a lose-lose situation for South Korea, Japan, and the United States. U.S. wanted to use the U.S.-Japan-Korea trilateralism as a pillar of its Asia policies, and it is still a pillar. because it is their locations, Japan and Korea's location, is very strategically important to pressure China. South Korea and Japan, they were sharing their information about North Korea issues and maybe China issues, but of course still they have trilateral intelligence sharing amongst the U.S. and Japan and Korea. So even though GSOMIA is gone, they still can share the information via the United States. But as far as some emergent situation is about, for example, missiles coming in and there is some kind of emergence intelligence sharing between Japan and Korea about the missile defense system, for example, the time that they need for direct intelligence sharing should be shortened rather than, via the United States. So that kind of emergent situation would be something that I'm worrying about. But still, I think if they are willing to continue their trilateralism and the bilateral alliances, I think, the big picture would be still stay put.
Just quickly before we move on to our next question then, if South Korea now has to go through this third party to get information from Japan, before it used to be real time, what kind of time are we looking at now?
What do you mean time?
In terms of seconds or minutes or an hour or something?
Okay. As I have said, some emergent situation is something that is related to the bilateral information sharing between Japan and Korea. If this is gone, we have TISA, which is a trilateral intelligence sharing agreement amongst the U.S. and Japan and Korea. So, for example, let's assume that North Korea shoots some missiles, and there should be some missile defense capabilities to be operated, for example, by Japan or by Korea and by the United States. So if Japan needs to get ready for the missile defense system vis-a-vis North Korean missiles, and they have to get a lot of information from South Korea. And that is such a short amount of time operations and intelligence sharing. So if they try to get the information of South Korea throughout the United States, the time space would be too much, and they would might not be ready for that kind of emergent situations.
Okay, so that really gives us an idea of just how serious this decision was. Now, this spat escalated quickly, as you touched upon before, from court rulings on historical issues, wartime forced labor, then to trade, and now it's security. How do you see this playing out, especially given the complete lack of trust between Seoul and Tokyo? Is there any way back from this, or is it going to continue to spiral out of control?
I think from the perspective of domestic politics, the Japan and Korea conflict is a win-win situation for Japanese and Korean government. That's irony, because Prime Minister Abe, based upon the conservative public opinion supporting his government, is using that public opinion, wants to go for the revision of constitution. So it needs a conflict with South Korea. South Korean government too. I mean, President Moon Jae-in, by his willingness to be determined to Japan and fight with Japan, is getting a lot of support from the public opinion. So domestic politics is there. I don't think the conflict will be finished. So I think what we need to think about is a very strong arbitration by the United States, or if conflicts escalate and they lose their support from the public opinion, I think there will be the time that they would be willing to come and talk and come back to dialogue.
Okay, Professor Kim, thank you very much for making time in your busy schedule to answer our questions this morning. We'll just have to see how this plays out, but like you say, for now, it isn't looking very good at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let's get some perspective from a US-based expert on Seoul's withdrawal decision from this intelligence sharing pact with Japan. Joining us on Skype, I'm happy to say, is Henry Sokolski, Executive Director of the Non-Proliferation Policy Education Center, which is a think tank based in Virginia. Henry, I have to say I'm generally not surprised by much these days, being in this news business for over 10 years now, but I was genuinely dumbfounded to hear this news yesterday. As someone with years of experience of Northeast Asia issues, what's your reaction to South Korea's move? And as I asked Professor Kim a moment ago, do you see any way this situation improves, or is it just going to keep going further and further down the plug hole, so to speak?
Well, left alone, I think there's no question it's going to get worse. As the previous speaker, Professor Kim, explained, it really pays domestically to do this in Japan and South Korea. There's not much of a break unless the United States gets involved much more seriously than it has so far. And so it's not good. It will get worse unless the United States gets more involved.
In what sense do you think it might get worse then?
Well, I mean, there's so much great history between these two countries, so much to work with. More trade problems. The cooperation on anything related to national security, there are still other things that can be taken down, as was explained by Professor Kim. Why stop where we are?
Right.
You know, unless there is some pushback from, I think, the United States, unfortunately, I think the domestic logic is not yet exhausted itself.
Okay, we'll get into where this leaves the United States in just a moment's time. But I wanted to get your opinion on just how badly this move handicaps trilateral coordination and cooperation between the US, South Korea and Japan in dealing with the continued nuclear missile threats posed by North Korea. Let's not forget the regime has fired off several short-range missiles just over the past few weeks alone.
Well, look, you've already heard from the Pentagon. That ought to be dispositive as to how the United States views it, grimly. You've heard from the Japanese. They're not pleased. We haven't heard from China or North Korea, but I'm pretty sure they're very happy. Now, it doesn't take brilliance to see through what the answer to your question is. The alliance relationship between the United States and Japan and between the United States and South Korea is vitally important to keep China and North Korea, from taking liberties in the region. They know that if these three countries work together, they will have their hands full doing anything aggressive. To the extent that we look divided in any way whatsoever, it's to their advantage, and they will work this diplomatically. Watch.
Right, and let's get the US approach to this then. The Trump administration, well, up until about 10 hours ago, when Pompeo made some comments, has really maintained a kind of hands-off approach to this problem between its two closest allies in this region. Do you think that Washington really now has to step up to the plate, especially as you touched upon in your last answer? Because otherwise China and to a lesser extent, perhaps North Korea, are really going to capitalize on this enormous wedge that has formed between Seoul, Tokyo, and potentially between Seoul and Washington as well?
Well, you know, it's almost clear from the question what the answer is. Yes, and I think in specific something that the people in Washington and at the White House and Congress and the Pentagon need to start thinking about, as well as folks in Seoul and Tokyo, is there are going to be basing agreements that are going to be renegotiated with the United States. And perhaps it's time quietly to start thinking about the terms more broadly than just money and basing rights. I think we need to start saying to Japan, the terms of our agreement with you will depend a great deal on whether you drop your trade restrictions and restore your preferred trade status with South Korea. And with regard to South Korea, when we get to that basing agreement, that the terms of that will be colored by whether or not South Korea is willing to put its further legal demands for reparations on ice, and whether they're willing to rejoin this agreement or its functional equivalent. Whether we'll do that, I don't know, but if not, it's a mistake.
Right, well, we'll have to see how this unfolds, but it's seriously an extremely serious situation with as yet unknown implications, not only for South Korea, but for the region as a whole. And who knows, perhaps Pompeo or the new US Defense Secretary could be making their way over to South Korea and Japan very soon. Henry, we appreciate your insights and thanks for sharing them with us today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Now, in other news, Washington's point man on North Korea met Seoul's Deputy National Security Advisor on Thursday before departing Seoul. From that meeting, the South Korean Deputy Security Chief said he got the impression the stalled nuclear talks between the North and the US will be back up and running soon. Park Hee-jun with the details.
It appears the nuclearization talks between North Korea and the U.S. will resume soon, says South Korea's Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Hyunwook. After meeting Washington's top envoy on North Korea, Stephen Biegun, in Seoul on Thursday, he told reporters that's the impression he got from Biegun.
I cannot reveal all the details from the more than an hour-long talks we had, but I got the impression the dialogue between North Korea and the U.S. will resume soon, and I think that'll go well.
And he reaffirmed that South Korea maintains a good, cooperative relationship on the matter with the U.S.
South Korea and the U.S. are coordinating closely on the negotiations and the denuclearization process. The two sides will continue to work well together and will most likely share everything with each other thanks to the confidence Biegun and his counterpart Lee don't have in each other.
Even with Pyongyang's statement the same day that appears to reject the possibility, Kim said he believes they will start again. He did not, however, elaborate on why, but he did say that the U.S. appreciates South Korea's moderation to achieve its goal despite the North's continued harsh rhetoric toward the South. According to Kim, Biegun also raised the issue of cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo, including South Korea and Japan's military intelligence sharing pact. But again, no further details. Meanwhile, Biegun, before leaving the country, met with his South Korean counterpart Lee Do-hoon and Unification Minister Kim Hyun-chol. There had been hope that he might sit down with North Koreans at the demilitarized zone during his trip, but there are no signs that he did. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
South Korea is putting tighter safety checks on Japanese food imports starting today. According to the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, the government is doubling the number of inspections on food imports from Japan that have a record of being sent back due to radioactive contamination. The Food Ministry also plans to double the amount of samples inspected. The new measures will be applied to 17 products, including tea and chocolate. The South Korean government will raise monthly healthcare insurance payments by 3.2% next year. The Health Ministry says it set the rate on Thursday, raising the monthly average from roughly $92 to $95 for workers. The fee for regional subscribers will go up from $72 to $74 a month. The hike is the biggest increase in 8 years. The government has said starting this year, it plans to raise healthcare payment rates by an average of around 3.5% every year until 2022.
Good morning. Today is Cheseol, which is meant to signal the end of summer heat and the start of cooler autumn weather. It is still warm in the afternoon, but at least we have comfortable morning temperatures to start the day. So it's nice we don't have to turn the air conditioning to get a good quality night's sleep. But the cooler morning lows, though, will rise quickly to the 30s by the afternoon. Plenty of sunshine will beat down on us, boosting UV rays to high or very high levels, so have your hat and sunglasses ready. But overall, the weather looks promising and there are no weather alerts in place at this time. Daily highs will be ranging between 28 to 31 degrees Celsius across the country, which is a touch warmer than the seasonal average. This weekend's weather looks nice as well with bright sunny skies. Next week, though, we'll see another band of rain sweeping the country. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Friday morning here in Seoul. If you don't see you, have a wonderful weekend. Our next newscast is coming up at noon Korea time in around an hour and a half from now. So until then, goodbye.